Next we will see a typical dicot embryo. This is a typical dicot embryo, and they are comparing it with LS of an embryo of grass, that means a monocot embryo. So first we will study the dicot embryo. In the dicot embryo you can see two cotyledons, and we can draw the two cotyledons here. Now you consider this as the embryonal axis, an imaginary axis, okay, an embryonal axis. And if that is the case, means these two are cotyledons, and this is the remaining part of the embryo. The portion of the embryo above the level of attachment of cotyledons, so these two are cotyledons. The part of the embryonal axis above the level of attachment of cotyledons, so this is the level of attachment of the cotyledons. That part, the above the level of attachment of embryo, this portion will have tissues called as epicotyle. As I told you earlier, epicotyle will develop to form the future leaves, and the epicotyle will terminate to form the plumule. So this part, the terminating part of the epicotyle is called plumule. Plumule will develop to form the shoot. So that means that plumule will develop here, it will become the shoot of the plant. So they are present in between the two cotyledons. Later on, the cotyledons actually serve for nourishing the developing embryo. Later the cotyledon size will also reduce and they will shrink, and finally you will see the embryo. So the part of the embryonal axis above the level of attachment of cotyledon, so this is what I have hyphenated as black here, that is the level of attachment of cotyledons. So the part of the embryo above the level of cotyledons, we have the tissue called epicotyle, which will develop to form leaves, and the epicotyle will terminate to form the plumule or shoot of the plant. They will grow up at the shoot of the plant. Now the part below the level of attachment of cotyledons, part of the embryo below the level of attachment of cotyledons, here, this tissue is called hypocotyle, and they will grow up as the stem of the plant. Hypocotyle terminates as root of the plant, but initially they will be called as radicle. Radicle will have a root cap to protect the ends of the roots. So this is about a dicot embryo, mature dicot embryo, parts of a mature dicot embryo. A dicot embryo has got two cotyledons, and the level of attachment of the part of the embryo above the level of attachment of cotyledon has a tissue called epicotyle, and epicotyle terminates to form plumule. The part of the embryo below the level of attachment of cotyledons is called hypocotyle. Hypocotyle terminates to form radicle, and radicle is enclosed with root cap. So this is a embryo we see in dicots. Now next is about monocot. In monocots there is only one cotyledon, and that one cotyledon is placed towards the side of the embryonal axis. So this is the embryonal axis. If this is the embryonal axis, now here in case of dicot, the embryonal axis is like this. On both sides, either sides of the embryonal axis, we find the cotyledons. But here monocots have only one cotyledon. They have only one cotyledon, and that too they are placed on the sides of the embryonal axis. So this is the embryonal axis. So they are placed on the either side of, laterally they are placed, cotyledon. Cotyledon has been given another name in case of monocots, they are called scutellum. So the level of attachment of the cotyledon is here. So the part of the embryonal axis above the level of attachment of cotyledon differentiates to form the epicotyle, which will later form the leaves. Epicotyle terminates to form the plumule. The part of the embryonal axis below the level of attachment of cotyledon, that is here, this area is called hypocotyle. Hypocotyle will develop to form the stem of the plant. Hypocotyle terminates to form the radicle. And radicle is been enclosed with root cap. In addition to plumule as well as a root cap, in addition to that, in case of monocot embryos, the plumule is covered by a sheath which is called as coleoptile. Similarly, the radicle is also covered with a sheath which is called as coleorhiza. So these are the parts of dicot as well as monocot embryo. So I will explain the monocot embryo. In monocot embryo, the scutellum is placed towards the side of the embryonal axis. The embryonal axis consists of the following parts: plumule, epicotyle, hypocotyle, radicle, and coleoptile as well as coleorhiza. The part of the embryonal axis above the level of attachment of cotyledon forms the epicotyle tissue that terminates in plumule. Plumule is covered with coleoptile. The part of the embryonal axis below the level of attachment of scutellum is called the hypocotyle, that terminates in radicle and is covered by coleorhiza. Similarly, in dicot embryo also, the embryonal axis is seen here. So the part of the embryo above the level of attachment of cotyledon, this is the level of attachment of cotyledon, above the level of attachment of cotyledon comes the epicotyle tissue that terminates in plumule. Below the level of attachment of cotyledons, we see the hypocotyle tissue that terminates in radicle and root cap. So that's how we can compare monocot as well as dicot embryos.